All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon if you're not on the Pacific Coast as I am. This is Heather Burke. I'm the National Partnership and Volunteer Program Manager for the Corps of Engineers, and really happy today to have our partners from the Ruffed Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society. We formed a national MOU with these organizations back in October of 2021, and so we asked a couple of their folks to talk about how we can work together. So today we have Todd Waldron on. He is the Northeast Region Forest Conservation Director. And then we also have Ben Larson, who is the Mid-Atlantic Forest Conservation Director for these organizations. And they're going to talk a little bit about the MOU that we signed. They're going to talk about what their organization does. We've got some examples of projects that have been done at Corps Lakes, and we do have at least one person on from the Corps who will be able to jump in and talk about his experience working with their organization. So I will turn it over here in a sec. Just as a reminder, though, I think everyone has done a great job of putting themselves on mute. So we're good to go there. But if you have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to pop it in the chat. I'll monitor that and I can jump in and ask Todd or Ben the question, or you can save it for the end, and we'll also have time at the end if you want to come off mute to be able to ask your questions verbally as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Todd and Ben to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Heather. And as Heather mentioned, we will have time at the end. I would love to get some discussion and questions going on. I know from RGS and AWS perspective, we'd love to think through with other facilities how we can collaborate in other places. So, they will have probably at least 10 minutes at the end to think all that kind of thing through. I've got a slide talking about some maybe sort of best types of projects that we could think about at other facilities. And hopefully the examples that I'll discuss in the MOU will sort of spur some ideas too. So just overall, I want to give a little background on RGS and AWS, Ruffed Grouse Society, American Woodcock Society. Two organizations joined, I forget, 20 years ago, something like that. So we're one organization, and the sort of logic of that I'll mention as I talk a little bit about organizations. Have a little summary about the MOU. I'm sure it's probably similar to other MOUs the Corps has with other conservation organizations. And then the bulk of the time, I'll talk about some collaborations prior and ongoing collaborations in the Mid-Atlantic. Todd will talk about one up in New Hampshire. And then, as I mentioned, I'll kind of give some ideas around general sort of priorities or sort of maybe best fits in terms of Corps facilities and reservoirs and potential collaborations at other places. And then Heather suggested we include a slide at the end for our contact information. So Todd and I will have our emails, and plus our forest conservation directors in the kind of upper Midwest and then down the Southern Appalachians. So just a little background about RGS and AWS. Sort of the way to think about us is that we work with a lot of different organizations. Forest management for wildlife is really our focus. Although we have a couple species in our names, game birds, we really work across the range of game and non-game wildlife. We get a lot of grants related to songbirds, which are also having population challenges due to lack of habitat, diverse forest habitats. So think of us as wide-ranging in our interests. The real background on RGS and AWS, there's been a decline in habitat and thus populations for many years. These are the states where grouse and woodcock are listed in state wildlife action plans as a species of concern or greatest conservation concern. So these are long-term, decades-long population declines, mostly related to decline in habitat. West Nile virus is also a factor, but we're focused on the habitat because better habitat will lead to more resilient populations that can bounce back after West Nile. Um, Indiana actually stopped its hunting season for grouse because the population got so low, and the other states are thinking about that too. So um, it's uh, it's really this is a sort of summary of the issue. We've got a lot of forests that look too much alike. One biologist refers to this as the sea of sameness. So you think of all the forest landscapes, many regions of the country with a sort of continuous closed canopy. Looks great, but it's not good for wildlife. Really what wildlife need, is a much more diverse assemblage of forest types, structures, open forests, young forests, older forests, as well as more young forest. Both grouse and woodcock really need young forest. That's the sort of logic of AWS joining with RGS a few years ago. Um, so there's just a crying need for good forest management that leads to regeneration harvests. That's good for the long-term resiliency and sustainability of forests as, um, for all of the ecosystem benefits they provide: climate, water, habitat, recreation, and wood products. Really, the key to maintaining all of those, attaining all those goals, is good forest management, especially in priority places. Um, so we've got a little technical detail about all that, but we can get into maybe later. But really, it's not just grouse and woodcock. Golden wing warblers at the top there, right above the ruffed grouse. They're in trouble. They need more young forests too. Meadowlarks, and of course, deer and turkeys also benefit, and bear benefit from a diverse array of habitats, provide better food sources through the course of the year. Cerulean warblers, they need open canopy forests. Think about sort of like park-like stands with large remaining trees, large canopy trees with a lot of space around them. And it's really been interesting since I've been at RGS, learned a lot about the biology. I'm not a biologist, I'm a forester. Um, RGS shifted to a model of using foresters rather than biologists because we're really focused on implementing the biology that's been known for decades. But we're learning new things too. One thing recently is that some bird species that nest in old forests, they take their fledglings to young forest. Wood thrush, great example. So they nest in what you might think of as old growth, but they need young forest right nearby. And obviously fledglings can't go very far. So you need this intermixing of old and young forest, as well as medium age forests, and open canopy forests. That's what we're really after. There's a lot of detail around that, but just in general, diversity is the key. So the way we're working on that, different regions, different landowners, federal, state, large industrial, small private forest owners, is a concept called dynamic forest restoration. The idea is to establish and maintain a shifting mosaic. The challenging thing about working on young forest habitat is that even if you have enough of it in one place, it grows older. So it's not a fixed thing on the landscape. You have to keep maintaining your stewardship. So a project in 2024 is going to reach its sort of best condition 5 to 10 years later. But then in 15 to 20 years after that, or 15 to 20 years after the harvest, it's not going to be in such prime habitat condition. So you have to continually, every few years, every 5 years, do more management. And luckily, everything we're talking about is just good, solid forest management, dealing with invasives, sort of managing age classes to say have a diverse mix across the landscape. We've got some technical detail there, but generally you want to have, 10 to 15% in most forest types in most regions in a young forest condition. So you got to kind of continually do that every few years. We actually need more old forests. So if you think about sort of managing or sort of preserving, quote unquote, a chunk of the landscape, there's a lot of management actually that can improve the condition of old forests. You can sort of accelerate the habitat conditions by some certain management techniques. And then a good chunk of the landscape should be middle-aged forests. We've got most of the landscape in that sort of middle-aged category now, 80, 90% or more. Should be more balanced, like 30 to 55% in that sort of middle-aged category. And then, like I mentioned, a lot of the things we do are just good forestry, dealing with invasive disease, overcrowding. A lot of the management involves managing for oaks and other species that have a lot of climate resiliency. So there's just a lot of really interesting, exciting overlap between different sort of users and goals. Water quality, that's of course a key thing at reservoirs and along rivers. I know the aquatic conservation community is very interested in getting more large woody debris in rivers. So there's some overlaps between the aquatic restoration, ecosystem restoration, and good forest management. When you're thinning for wildlife, you can also stick some of those large trees in the river, which is not something you learn in forestry school. We're trying to do exactly the opposite, keep the trees out of the, but the biologists have learned that that's a need for the river ecology and the wildlife, and there's a sort of natural synergy there with forest management. All right, so we have regions. As I mentioned, we have foresters at RGS and AWS now. I've been with RGS about 3.5 years. Todd started a little before I did up in the Northeast. I'm in the Mid-Atlantic. We're hiring somebody in the Piedmont and Coastal Plain, and we have staff in the Western Great Lakes, Upper Midwest, Eastern Great Lakes, and the Southern Appalachians. So I'll have all of our email addresses at the last slide in case you want to reach out and think about how to collaborate. Chapters. One of the great things about RGS and AWS, we've got dozens of chapters. And think of these as your volunteer as your volunteer pools. These are very active, engaged, mostly hunters and fishermen. And they like to do habitat projects. Joel and I have been working a little bit on. Luckily, we have a great chapter that's been doing most of the work on at Tionesta. Just fantastically motivated, skilled members who do a lot of work for habitat. So that can be part of the collaboration. Also in Western Maryland, I'll talk more about our work at Jennings Randolph Lake. All right, so the MOU, I helped develop this and get this signed, really based on some facility specific, if you will, MOUs. We had at least 2 or 3, probably more, like an MOU between Jennings Randolph Lake and our chapter out in Western Maryland, the Backbone Mountain chapter. And really this, we wanted a sort of overarching one that made it possible and easier for chapters and facilities and staff to work together in all kinds of places. So it's, a lot of information sharing, looking for overlapping interests. Obviously, facilities, Army Corps facilities have natural resource goals and plans, and anything done has to be consistent, compatible with those. So really, it's sort of a matching process. What are we interested in doing, and what are the resource needs and challenges, and how can we help? You can take a look at that. I don't need to go through point by point. Okay, we can come back to that if there's any questions. All right, so we wanted to devote most of the time to talking about some ongoing and prior collaborations. Hopefully this will sort of inspire some thinking about possible collaborations at other facilities. And these are all very sort of tailor-made, they're all very specific to facilities and resource needs and challenges and the interests of chapters and staff and funding. Unfortunately, we don't have a sort of overarching national pot of money. I'd love to identify that because I think there's huge potential to grow this collaboration. So if anybody has any leads or suggestions on how to fund a larger or much, dramatically scaled up collaboration, do let me know. So I've been at RGS now about 3 years, so starting about 21, I guess the spring of 2021. So this was before I started. Um, but this is sort of a representative example, I think, because there was some timber sales, some non-commercial management at Raystown Lake, some work with seedlings, food plots, herbicide, had some funders, at least one funder involved. There's almost always a state agency that helps provide resource management expertise. Pennsylvania, the Game Commission's involved in a lot of the core facilities. So it's usually at least a three-way collaboration between a state agency, the core staff, and RGS and staff, and maybe members. Um, Also worked a lot with Blue Marsh Lake. Scott actually was just recently retired, but Scott at Blue Marsh Lake, he worked is both at Blue Marsh Lake, but he's also an RGS member. So that was another prior collaboration in Pennsylvania. Ongoing collaborations. I had a chance to talk to Joel about a year and a half ago, and we've got a great chapter up in Northwest PA, and they've been going to town with Joel and his staff. So mostly focused on woodcock habitat. Um, what I should mention about woodcock in particular is that they eat mostly worms. That's the largest component share of their diet. So obviously they need to be in soils with worms, wet soils in particular. So wet soils along rivers with a lot of shrubby, either sort of tall shrubs or a high density of small trees. That's their real preferred habitat. And Tionesta, there's a lot of that along Tionesta Creek. So we have one chapter in Pennsylvania and other chapters that have been doing quite a bit of non-commercial management. Joel's been thinking about how to scale that up. But there's been other organizations too, Pheasants Forever, Boy Scout Troops. I just talked to backcountry hunters and anglers in Pennsylvania. They want to be involved. So you should add other information, Joel, that you have, other, perspectives and how this helps you and, integrate recreation and the public and whatever else.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Ben. So it's been a really good journey with you folks, and I'm honestly surprised on how fast everything happened. Usually we try and find avenues to approach a project within a partnership, and then we saw this MOU was made, and it's like, wow, super streamlined. And I said, okay, maybe in a year or two we'll actually get something on the ground. No, actually, it ended up being like a month or two, and it was very astonishing. It was great. You'll see like the one picture there with just a few folks there. That's where it started. And then you see the overhead picture. And that wasn't even everybody, like in the bottom portion. That last work day, we had over 40 people, and it was from folks from New York, Ohio, and West Virginia. Some folks drove 3.5 hours just to help us out. It was crazy, actually. Um, Very good networking opportunity. You can tell the support is there. Folks are coming out from all over the region to give us a hand, and we couldn't be more happy with the help that we got. Uh, like you had mentioned, Ben, this is strictly just like an alder cut. This is something we kind of wanted to test the waters with. And when you came out and we relied on your expertise, because let's face it, you guys are the ones that know what needs done. We have the real estate and the potential, and you're letting us know what we can do with it. And we really appreciated that scientific background on it and why things are how they are and what we can do to make them better for our region, our recreating public, our sportsmen. And we saw a great impact with that one little hunter walker path we made. This year, remarkably, we saw a notable difference of woodcock coming through. I didn't get a chance to run my dog through or anything like that, but I talked to a few folks who had, and they were really appreciative of that. And again, the local chapters have been super supportive. Just, hey, let me know whenever you want to come out, or we'll give you a hand. Anything you need. Do you need signage? Because that's part of the MOU too. So they can help us out with some signage, some advertisement, some public affairs stuff. I mean, it's just all good news stories, and it's super streamlined. And again, using that partnership mechanism, really, we're saving money as well. not only on labor, but also on just some supplies and materials that these folks bring to the table, along with their knowledge. I mean, you can't beat it. It's a good group of folks. It's great work to get outside, work together with. And we're just really looking forward to doing more in the future. There's a lot more work that can be done here. And over the past year and a half, we've cultivated a very good partnership with a lot of folks, especially in the Potter County area, that are coming around here. And I think we're going to see some only better things, only better things. So I definitely encourage anybody to take advantage of this. I mean, if you think, well, it's going to take a while to get started, it might, but not in our case. It really spun almost out of control. It was like, whoa, there's a lot of people here. All right, let's get some work done. You know, something that should have taken 4 hours, our last work day, I kid you not, took about 45 minutes. And they said, well, what are we going to do with the rest of the time? So it was very good opportunity, and we're very happy to be working with you guys and looking forward to more work in the future.
Well, thanks very much, Joel. I'm glad it's working so well. I should really give out a shout out to our upland bird hunt, and Mary Hosmer in particular. She's a fantastic chapter leader, does a lot of great habitat projects. She's just a fantastic example of an RGS member who helps put together and maintain collaborations and gets people out. She even does press releases after projects like this, and local papers cover it. So that's great. And it also emphasizes the sort of woodcock opportunity. We'll come back to that. So also in Pennsylvania, this is one that I've been a little more directly involved in, sort of central Pennsylvania, Bald Eagle State Park, Joseph Sayers Lake. A lot of partners involved: Fish and Wildlife, Game Commission, RGS, and others, the state park. You can see the photo there. The habitat at Joseph Sayers Lake in Bald Eagle State Park. It's quite extensive. In fact, our president and CEO, Ben Jones, thinks it's probably the premier woodcock habitat in Pennsylvania. There is a management plan for woodcock. You can see those blocks kind of laid out. Again, this is wet, fairly wet, not soaked, but sort of wet, moist soils down along a stream, and thick, shrubby growth that woodcock just love. But it needs to be managed, every 5-10 years. You need to get in there and cut it. Otherwise it gets too thick or stems too large and the habitat value goes down. So we've been kind of revisiting and re-energizing the existing collaboration and plan. Needs to be some herbicide done, so we're going to kick in some money. Fish and Wildlife has a mulcher. So they're doing some work, or going to do some work, actually mulching some of the stands. Great public access. Really, it's right by roads, in a fairly, very popular park, next to a very popular park. Technically, I think it may be in Bald Eagle State Park. So just another great example, Central Pennsylvania. And then one I've also been quite involved in is one in Western Maryland. This is out in the far western part of Maryland, the mountainous part of Maryland. This is on the North Branch of the Potomac, Jennings Randolph Lake. And our Backbone Mountain chapter, going back to 2013, I guess it was, signed one of the sort of facility-specific MOUs. So we've had more than 10 years of collaboration. Just a fantastic record of working together, figuring out how to help implement the Jennings Randolph Lakes management plan. They just recently renewed it. So we're going to work within the new plan. We're also starting to work with neighboring landowners, adjoining landowners. This part of Maryland had extensive, and actually still does have extensive, coal mining. So a lot of the adjoining lands are either still being mined or they were reclaimed, which means, according to federal law, that the contour of the land is restored and then they're planted to a perennial grass. not so good for forest wildlife. But there is a way of actually restoring those to good forest habitat. Involves quite expensive digging um, of the soil to increase water percolation, aeration. So there's a lot of heavy equipment involved. It's very expensive, but our chapter out there worked with the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation and Enforcement, Maryland Forest Service, on I guess it was a 24-acre reforestation project. That actually was on, I think it was partly on Jennings Randolph property and then also on some adjoining property. And I've been working with the Nature Conservancy and a small new nonprofit that's helping private landowners implement the forest reclamation approach. We've been talking to a couple landowners who have land right next to Jennings Randolph Lake that's reclaimed. We're going to help get that back into forest. It's kind of an interesting project because the landowners are going to do solar on some of the reclaimed mine land and then do the forest restoration approach next to the solar. So it'll kind of be a combination solar and forest restoration project. And so there's sort of a complicated process. Army Corps of Engineer Forester from Raystown Lake helped with a project a few years ago. And now Natural Resource Conservation staff in Maryland and West Virginia are going to help going forward, implementing the management in Jennings Randolph Lake's plan. And again, our local chapter was just instrumental in sort of maintaining this relationship and helping implement projects, a lot of volunteer projects along the way, the planting, and additional things going forward. So I don't know if Fran was able to join us or not, but Fran has been fantastic to collaborate with.
It doesn't look like she was able to get on. I don't see her in the list of participants. I think she's still in her meeting.
Okay. I'll let Todd describe the collaboration he's got going up in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Ben. It's great to see so many fantastic projects with our partnership with Army Corps. And as you can all see, there's a lot of different ways to plug in. I'm working up in New Hampshire with the Blackwater and Hopkinton Everett installations with Pascal Carter and Cody Simons and the team. And it's been a really good partnership, similar to what Joel was saying over in Tionesta and PA. We've had similar dynamics with our outlook around the partnership. We started working together in 2022, and it was apparent right from the get-go that there were a lot of commonalities and shared values, and that when we started looking at the plans, how they were managing the 14,000 or 16,000 acres of forests around the installations, that there was a lot of compatibility with their sustainable forestry programs and our goals for habitat management for woodcock and grouse. And so we had the conversations. We started out, if you're looking for kind of an entry point and you're like, okay, how can we start a project? It was really as simple as just sitting down, having a meeting and reviewing plans. So they have like an annual meeting where they're getting together and looking at their forestry plan. In the case of Blackwater and Hopev, they work with the state of New Hampshire, DCNR, the state agency, the forestry agency. And so they have like a 25 or 30-year agreement for forestry. A DCNR forester actually helps them with their forest management planning and timber sales and projects and so forth. And so they were already dialed in on the forestry side. And so what we were able to do was just sit down and have a conversation and look at what they're doing. And that helped us assess opportunities for how to plug in. And so we have the Granite State chapter in New Hampshire, really fired up, doing great work, just like it's happening in Maryland and Pennsylvania and other places. And one of the keys to the success has been our chapter chair there, Jeremy Thompson. And so he's been a great link. He works well with Army Corps staff. And so having a specific point of contact with the chapter has been very helpful. And so if there's a habitat chair for a chapter or a chapter lead, having that communication has been really great. And so from a governance standpoint, we have annual meetings, we sit down, we review plans, and then we've been able to identify projects that work, that everybody feels comfortable with. So it's been on a chapter level. We've been working together for old field maintenance, for rotational mowing, for woodcock, for alder shearing projects, for mastication work and invasive work, and also like working with the forester and the conservation team and the Army Corps folks to position those. So like if we're reviewing timber sales and the forestry work that's coming up, how can we take advantage of that spatially to be able to get the most impact for the work? So that conversation together has been, I think, impactful and helpful and positive. And so we have a great chapter on the ground. They're helping get this work done. They're funding some of the projects. This has led to an opportunity also to look at cooperative management for a certain acres. So, you know, like I mentioned, DCNR is helping the HopEv team manage the 14,000 or 18,000 acres around the installation. But we've identified a smaller block within that where we could dedicate it to grouse conservation and woodcock conservation. And so we're looking at like a cooperative management plan process where we can dial in, we can identify work and silviculture and plans, and then, you know, work together for the chapter and our funding options to get the work done there and have it dedicated toward those wildlife outcomes. So hope that's helpful. Glad to answer any questions at the end. And thanks for all your support. If you're in the Northeast, I'm based in New York State, and as Ben had said, I work in the Northeast. So all of the New England states, from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and then southern New England with Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. We'd be thrilled to work with any of you.
Great, thanks, Todd. All right, so as I mentioned, you know, the sort of low-hanging fruit, the big sort of general opportunity is around riparian, low-lying, wetter forests for woodcock habitat. So it's really kind of a, you know, if you have some of that habitat on your facility, don't really have a management sort of implementation capacity yet, but there is, you know, potential for that in your management plan, and there's probably a lot of opportunities for us to think through how we can help get those plans implemented. That's a big part of the dynamic forest restoration block approach, is to help agencies overcome obstacles in implementing their plans. Do that with state forests and wildlife management areas and national forests, and it's a very kind of a applicable approach with Army Corps facilities as well. So, and then hunter walker trails. I know you have fantastic engagement with recreational users, and hunter walker trails are a great way to sort of identify the opportunity, and especially for new hunters, beginning hunters, you know, having a sort of signage and place identified, and sort of kind of integrating the management with the hunter walker trail. It's really great for, you know, getting people back into hunting or new hunters. So that's probably the best place to start thinking about collaboration. But there's obviously a lot of different variations depending on your facility and needs and interests and stuff. So got plenty of time for conversation, discussion. Like I said, our emails will be in the last slide. So if you do have, you know, a question you want to send to me or one of my colleagues, Todd, or my colleagues, John or Nick in Southern Apps or the Upper Midwest, that'll be available too. But happy to take any questions now, chat, or just people can just unmute and
Yeah, thanks, Todd and Ben. That's really great examples that you've shared here with projects you've done with the Corps. I put in the chat a link to the Find Your Local Chapters But of course, on their last slide, you also have direct emails that you can reach out to the conservation directors from each of the regions. As I said, there's a lot of volunteers out there, and as Joel mentioned, there's a lot of expertise. So, tap into this organization as a resource for that expertise, for some of those materials and supplies that they may bring. You mentioned, Ben, that it's kind of a matching process. And I like seeing how most of the projects are involving multiple partners, not just RGS and AWS, but bringing in Boy Scouts. We have a national MOU with backcountry hunters and anglers, and they're looking for projects to do with us. So that'd be great if we can combine those organizations working on projects. And then, looking for funding sources, there may be things like grants that could be applied for through companies like Bass Pro, Cabela's. They have conservation type grants, and especially when you're tying in that recreational component or that hunting component that meets their customer base. And then you also mentioned that in some places like Jennings Randolph, you've been working with private landowners on adjacent lands. And I'm sure you're probably aware, but the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they have funding to do conservation on private lands. I'm very familiar with it because my husband is the state coordinator in Oregon for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife private lands program. But I know they have state coordinators out in all those states that you work in as well. So, and then one more thing that came to mind as you were talking about the hunter walker trails. Within the Corps of Engineers, each year we have a pot of money we set aside that's called the Handshake Partnership Funds. It's not, we can't give it out, we can't grant it to an outside entity, but we can use it for projects on our lands working with partners. So I could see some opportunities for projects in our Northeast region if they wanted to do some conservation projects with you that also involve those hunter walker trails, so you get the stewardship and the recreation component. Those would really compete well for that funding, and a project can apply for up to $25,000 for working with the partners. So that's just something to look into. Anyone that's on the call, our call for nominations for handshake funding goes through September 30th. And so if you'd like to work with Ruffed Grouse, that'd be a great way to utilize those funds. But I've done enough talking. I want to turn it over and leave some opportunity for folks online. Either you can come off mute, or I haven't seen anything in the chat yet. But does anybody have any questions or comments for Todd and Ben?
Hey, Heather, this is Scott Kranek. Hi, guys. This is a really interesting stuff. The area that I work in, we do a lot of habitat conversion we're trying to do even more from turf grass to like native grasses and pollinators. And our projects are a bit unique because surrounding the lakes, the land is owned by the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District. And while you were talking, I was thinking of all sorts of areas that sound like could be ideal habitat. And I definitely plan on, because we're in central Ohio, I definitely plan on contacting John. And I guess my only question is that the correct process to contact John, and then maybe somebody will get sent out, like they can meet, do a site visit to check out the habitat? Is that the best way to go about this?
Yeah, I would check with John. John's actually in Wisconsin, so it's quite a hike to get to Ohio, but we are looking to hire somebody actually in the Eastern Great Lakes.
Okay.
That would be closer. And it takes a while usually to get started. In the case with Joel, it happened really quickly, but it's good to reach out and start the process, and we will try to, help as soon as we can.
Okay, no, this is just it's really interesting, and I think we have some good habitat, so pretty exciting.
Yeah, thanks for your interest.
Yep.
And it looks like you have 3 chapters in Ohio. I'm looking at your chapter map. So Scott, maybe that would also be an opportunity to, if you go to the link that I put in the chat and you zoom in on Ohio, you can click those dots and it's got the contact phone and email. So you might just look for one of the ones that are closest to your projects.
Might be best to start with John. He can kind of think through the strategy working with chapters. But yeah, the chapters will be a resource eventually.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And I wrote the link down. But I'll start with John like you suggested, so this is good.
Great. The handshake funds, that's potentially a very helpful resource to have.
Yeah, I wish we had the authority to actually give that to partners to do work with, but it's just internal appropriations. It's just a pot of money we set aside each year at our headquarters to try and foster partnerships. So to encourage our folks at our lakes to be reaching out, looking for partnership opportunities and giving them something they can bring to the table, because they may not have it within their own project funds to do something. But if they can get that headquarters money, then they can go to a partner such as RGS and say, hey, we've got $25,000 plus staffing, plus materials that we can bring to this project. You know, is there a way we can work together with you? So it's this kind of helps get things going.
Yeah, it's perfect. Saw the question in the chat about minimum acres. That's one of the things that the biologists say about woodcock, is that they will respond even to management habitat improvements as small as an acre. So very small habitat requirements. So, that's why a volunteer project like, Joel and I were talking about a Thai Nesta with a crew of volunteers can make a difference for woodcock.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well, Ben, up here in New Hampshire. And I think it also is a comfortable spot for everybody to enter into work together. So, at the initiation of working with the Granite State chapter and our Army Corps partners at HOPEV, we wanted to identify projects that were meaningful and also achievable, and that wasn't going to like chew too much out at once, but just to kind of get ourselves working together to build that flow and that trust. And so that I think that looking back at it retrospectively has been a great way to get our feet wet, so to speak, with everything. And Heather, thank you. You had mentioned grants, and one of the funding pools that our Granite State chapter had tapped into was a Bass Pro small grant for habitat with the Army Corps folks. So they were able to secure that funding and then apply it to the work that they had identified. So that was great to see.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so many times it's just trying to find what's out there. And for the Corps, as a federal agency, there's a lot of grants that we are not eligible to apply for directly, but we can work through nonprofit partners such as yours to apply for those grants to do work on federal lands. We just can't be the grantee. So yeah, I think there's money out there. It's just trying to figure out where it's at and then working together to put in for it. And I'm also going to put a link to our handshake program in the chat as well for anyone that's on the call that's not familiar with it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Heather.
Mm-hmm. Looks like there's another question in the chat. Can you see that?
Oh, right. It's considered old forest. I mean, it varies by forest type and region, but, generally over 120, 50 years. And it often, old forest or old growth will have some similar characteristics, kind of technical things, but Um, for the purposes of I think the question, 150 years or older generally, but that does vary by forest type, of course, and region. So, oh, and
Yeah.
when did grouse require that type of forest? Um, Todd, you may have some experience with older forests in the Adirondacks and grouse.
Yeah, the diversity is the key. So just like humans, grouse have different needs throughout different times of the year. And so just like we have living rooms and kitchens and so forth in our house, they need all of that in the forest as well. And those different age classes of forest provide those different needs for food and breeding and brooding cover and so forth. So like having access to some older forest provides, well, for instance, it provides some mast sometimes, like for food. It can provide, like in the case of aspen types, where you have older aspens, they're not as old as what Ben's talking about with, 100 years old, but say they're 60, 70 years old, for budding and in the winter months. And so having that variety and having a diverse set of different age classes just kind of provides all of those different needs throughout the course of the year, and for their food and for their breeding requirements. And then I saw a question. You know what the status of the need is in Connecticut? Yeah, we do. So grouse and woodcock are both listed as species of greatest conservation need in Connecticut's State Wildlife Action Plan. We have been working with partners like Audubon, Connecticut, and Yale University, and some other partners, some land trusts. And there's definitely an opportunity around the Connecticut River Basin and watershed. And there's heavily forested areas up in the northwestern Litchfield Hills, if you're familiar with that, on the Berkshire border of Massachusetts. We're working with MDC, who is a watershed company in Massachusetts around Tolland, and then down into northern Connecticut. And so, and I saw Naugatuck River area. Yes, I think so. I'm not exactly familiar with that, but I'll take a look at it, and like we can have a conversation about that for sure and figure out like what the best way to plug into there is. So lots of opportunity in Connecticut and all the way up the river, all the way up to the upper Connecticut lakes in New Hampshire, quite frankly. So hope that's helpful. Did that answer questions? Great. Thank you, Marcy.
All right, good questions. Anybody else? Looks like you got one customer at least here.
I appreciate it very much, Heather. Thanks for helping set this up.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and close out. But all the contacts are here, and I'll get the version of the slide deck that I have doesn't have this slide in it. So if you can send that to me, Ben, I'll make sure that gets on our gateway, and then I'll also put this recording out there. So anybody that wasn't able to participate today can go online at any point and either go through the slides or listen and watch the actual webinar. But thank you so much for your time, both of you, today. It's always great to hear directly from our partners instead of people always having to listen to me yammer on about how great it is to work with organizations like yours. And thanks, Joel, for chiming in as well, because it is nice to hear from someone on the ground how it went. And your enthusiasm is really infectious. So I hope that we can get some more projects going at our core lakes, and we will look forward to continued working with you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Heather. Have a great afternoon. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, and everybody have a great weekend.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Ben.
See you, Todd. Thank you.